at their pre-day. So we're going to kind of pick up and talk about the evolution of risk assessment frameworks. I think this is an interesting conversation as insurance is coming into play, and even our more mature clients who have been doing risk assessments with Lifecycle Insights for a long time are kind of taking a step back and looking at how their assessment stacks up to some of the requirements for cybersecurity insurance, some of the requirements for CMMC and Nist, and just more and more frameworks kind of being slowly but surely and not ever so gently shoved down our throats. So I wanted to talk through just kind of where risk assessments came from, how they came into being, to give everybody a status quo on how we got where we are and where we really see it going and what we think you guys should be paying attention to. So this is a screenshot from a slide that I presented at the pre-day workshop for seven-figure MSP this week. And that slide talks about the evolution of cybersecurity frameworks in general. The first real one going mainstream being Nist 800-53, which launched in 2005. There's a lot of assessment questions. It was really boring. And it was really kind of an industry standard framework, but it didn't really have the government backing and all of that. Come 2020 or 2014, Nist CSF rolls out. It's the first real collaboration between government and, of course, academics and education and the technology community. That was the gold standard for about 15 minutes. And then we had Nist 800-171, which came on its heels very, very quickly. The change there was 800-171 was designed to protect controlled unclassified information. So information that doesn't require you to have full DoD and FedRAMP standards, but some really stringent best practices for MSPs and their clients. Fast forward a little further, we get into CIS 20. It got released in 2018. Of course, there were several versions of it before that, none of them really worth note. I really only brought up CIS version 7 to point out the fact that only a year later, version 7.1 came out, and there was a huge difference between the two, that being implementation groups. I think implementation groups, as they are called in CIS, or levels, which they call them in CMMC, which was released yet a year later, are really the thing that's going to change the way that we do our assessments. And I think it's something that MSPs need to consider. I'm going to pick on Kirk because he's here and I like to pick on Kirk, but and I literally just got off the phone with somebody else who is in the My IT process framework and kind of going through the Gary Pica standard of cybersecurity assessments. And there are MSPs out there who every quarter, sometimes more often, sometimes less, go check 300 or 400 standards for their customers, right? They're checking every little checkbox to make sure everything's dialed in, and they're doing this standardization play. And there's a lot of value in it. But doing that many things on day one for a customer and going and sitting down in front of the customer and going, okay, we assessed you against 300 items in a framework and you passed 4 of them. Now we only have 296 to go, right? Customer pulls all their hair out, ends up looking like me, and runs screaming from the room, knowing that they can't afford to work with you. There's no way they'll ever be done and everything will ever be right. And the haul is just too long for them to get there. So the concept of implementation groups or stages or whatever you want to call them in your risk assessment really is the thing I think that we're seeing CMMC reinforce. And again, it was refined and done even better in this version 8 of the CIS framework, where we're down to 3 implementation groups, CMMC down to 3 implementation groups. So the conversation that we had was around taking what you're doing in your cybersecurity assessments and breaking them out into implementation groups, so that you don't have to have 7 different risk assessment templates to go meet with your clients and do things 47 different ways, along the way. Hey, first time we meet a client, we only do this little assessment that we call pre-sales. 90 days in, we do an onboarding assessment, and that's a little more complicated. And 6 months in, we do another one that's a little more complicated. Implementation groups really can solve for this. So that really was just kind of to set the stage and show you guys a little bit of the exercise that we did at 7-Figure MSP, which was we gave everybody some stickers and let them go play in the room and show us where they thought certain standards belonged as far as the implementation group that they fit into. We had 8 of these posters around the room because we took a pretty long, complicated assessment and broke it up and let everybody go decide. If you had to put your existing risk assessment items into implementation groups, where would those fall today? Would everything go into basic? Would most of it be in emerging? Would you have an advanced implementation group that maybe only applies to a large or a small subset of your customers on the compliance heavy fringe of your offering, right? Do you have some stuff that only your Nist and CIS and CMMC and maybe HIPAA clients are required to have? Is there anybody here who's willing to own up and say, not all my customers get SOC, not all my customers get a SIEM solution? You know, maybe that's a thing that we reserve just for our medical clients or just for our highest level of clients. I think there's a place for that. I think there's a place for the conversation with your customer to say, hey, you know, we draw the line here between that emerging technology and advanced technology, and you're going to buy everything up to this point. And to the right of that, we're going to go, hey, is the juice really worth the squeeze for you? You're never going to have to do HIPAA. You don't handle classified or even controlled unclassified information. Your liability just isn't that big. This is kind of where you start checking the box that says acceptable risk. So with that, I think the challenge that we wanted to talk through today, it was, number one, we wanted to explain this concept. We wanted to show you guys how this works. I've gone through and done this already in Lifecycle Insights with the CIS 8 framework. So if you haven't looked at the template in the tool for the CIS version 8 framework, it actually already has implementation groups kind of built into it. And the difference between implementation groups and categories in the system is that we still utilize categories, and then we've flagged things in the item name and just said IG1, IG2, IG3 for implementation group 1, 2, and 3. We did this with CMMC. Or with
let me
CIS.
just interrupt for a second, because you know, they're working on tagging on assessments. So we're going to be able to tag these, which means you'll be able to report off them or filter by them. So I think that's, you know, a powerful piece as you're thinking about, I don't want to undo what I currently have. You won't have to, right? You'll be able to tag these in your own assessment. So if you like this idea, we're kind of coming up with a solution that will help.
And if you like the categories that you have today, right? A lot of folks are using hardware, software, you know, cybersecurity tools, you know, line of business applications, whatever. You know, they've got their 5 or 7 or whatever, however many categories, and they like them, and they're in the right order, and they're a nice talking point. But yes, tagging should free up the ability for you to leave things in the groups that they're in, and still be able to utilize the concept of, hey, before somebody becomes a customer, there's some basic cyber hygiene that they have to have. That's my minimum requirement. And over the next 180 days, we're going to work to get them from there all the way through my second implementation group, emerging, or whatever we want to call it. And some customers may draw the line there. Other customers, it may be that we just, over the next 365 days, work to deploy the more advanced things. You know, the monitoring of sensitive data and files as it flows through the network, the things that need a new tool that we might not even own yet, as we start to go look at those things. So this is a worksheet that we handed out. It was actually in the workbook that went out at the event. But what we talked about here was, and we gave everybody some time to just kind of sit and document and break out their own stuff. We'll give you guys a Google form here in just a minute. But the instructions were, take a few things in your current product offering and think through whether you see these as you know, the core of, this is the minimum level of some basic cyber hygiene that at which point I wouldn't even take a customer. Are these kind of that middle of the road where the customer's starting to get ramped up? These are the things we want them to have, or are we really in the advanced group? And for the example that I gave, I talked through email, because it's just an easy example. And it's a good example because it's an example where we're really assessing one thing, one piece of software, one application, but there's actually a version of it in every single implementation group. So you can have something as basic as email where the customer is only supportable if they're in Microsoft 365. That's my green answer on day one when I first meet them. If they're in 365, I know, even though they're probably misconfigured, I can go clean it up. I can make it right because it's in the right place, right? 90 days in, once I've done their onboarding, I want to make sure MFA is enabled. I want to get a banner on the email if it came from somebody outside the organization, right? I want to know SPF, DKIM, DMARC are all configured correctly, so we're not bouncing email that should be making it into somebody's mailbox. That's my minimum. 90 days in, we ought to be there. But maybe at the advanced configuration, maybe the really high compliance customer who's required to track the email of sensitive information and required to have some certain configurations out there. Maybe we have a configuration as code solution. Maybe we're out here making sure that we've got some specific policies deployed and enforced in the environment, and we get alerts if the policy drifts out of configuration, and we've got some automated remediation that goes back and rolls things back into that default configuration that we expect that client to be in. Nothing's worse than and Kirk, I think you're a perfect example of this. You guys do a lot of homework to make sure that when a tech troubleshoot something, they turn something off. You guys spend a lot of time going back and checking to make sure things are in the configuration that you thought you left them in, right?
Right.
So it's a big challenge, and so the finding automated ways to do that definitely solves for some of the problem. Does anybody have questions about the concept as a whole? Or even just some best practices and things you guys have learned along the way? Because as we're starting to roll out tags, we're thinking about how we might be using tags, and this is one of the big ways that we see them being valuable. I'm interested to hear the feedback. Or the silence.
You better not be at the wedding, Tim.
No, it's Sunday.
Okay. But is that a question for your assessment?
That is I believe that is a basic problem and also likely to be problematic.
Yep.
Alex, I have a question, if you don't
Yeah.
mind.
Yeah.
So sorry if I missed it, but is there a frequency that you recommend that we go through and say, hey, goes from emerging to basic?
So we actually talked about this, and I think that's going to be different for every MSP. But I think that is the purest example of why your risk assessment is a never done, always iterating tool, right? So I think some MSPs who are early in the process might go back and look at their risk assessment every month or every quarter and move things around and say, zero trusts, application whitelisting, whatever you want to call it. 6 months ago or a year ago or 2 years ago was probably advanced. It was probably only going into the highest, most fancy organizations. I think that's one of those that is working its way down, and is probably something that we're deploying to more and more and more of our customers today, right?
Well, and at a minimum, wouldn't you think if they're repackaging services or adding a new something to their standard service agreement, that automatically should force a conversation, because you're basically saying this is baseline for us.
Yep. And Tim says your frequency is based on your policy, and he's not wrong. If you haven't written a policy though, you probably should start to consider that.
Step one.
Well, I think there's a lot of value in sitting down and having that conversation internally and deciding how mature is our process. Everyone starts in a different place. Your mileage may vary. If you're mature and you've been doing this for years, then you probably need to revisit this less often. You could probably look at it every 6 months, right? If you're in a fast changing world where it's high security, or where frameworks are getting changed every time you turn around, looking at UCMMC, maybe you're doing it quarterly, maybe you're doing it monthly. If you're brand new to this and you're just getting your feet wet, then you're probably doing it monthly, because you're going out every month and you're doing 2 or 3 of these, and then you're sitting down and kind of tearing them apart and going, how did my risk assessments work? Is everything really where it belongs? Did I get the desired outcome that I wanted? So I would say your frequency, while it's important that you set one and that you do it on a regular basis, should depend on your outcome. If your outcome is, we really have this dialed in, we know what we're doing, we're firing on all cylinders, you probably need to look at it less, because those guys who have been doing this a long time probably have the most mature stack, probably have the best guidelines for at what order to do things in, that kind of a thing. But I agree with Tim 100%. You probably should.
Happy to offer a quick suggestion.
Yeah.
So when we do risk assessments, we come back with our red, yellows, and greens. Our reds and yellows, we determine what the highest risks are, and we create a plan of action and milestones. As part of that plan of action and milestones process, we set a start date and an end date, and maybe a date somewhere in the middle to review again. That POAM process can then help you dictate when you go back and do another risk assessment, right? So let's say you find MFA not enabled. That's a POAM. You define that as next week. Okay, we're going to enable that everywhere. And then you set your risk assessment. Okay, the following week after we've done it, or maybe it's a 3-week implementation or whatever, we go back to the risk assessment inside of LCI and say, now this is green. And that POAM is what dictates that plan of action.
And I think our next
milestone.
Yep. I think our next release of Report Builder will help cement some of that, because we're going to have the ability for you to go back and see reports, point in time reports, right? So you're going to get the ability to say, on 8/26, we ran this risk assessment, we found this issue, and maybe we create a ticket off that issue. They work the ticket, close the issue. When the ticket gets closed, we go back, revisit the assessment, see the date, run a comparison assessment, and update it, right? And copy everything else over, just update that one item and show the iteration of the process. Especially if you've got compliance customers, you want to track that. When did we fix it? Why did we change the answer that we changed? Is there actually fact that backs the upgrade that the upgrading of the answer?
This is why, go ahead. I'm sorry. I was just going to say, this is why those comparative assessments are going to be key in any compliance-based customer, because they want this continuing improvement over time and watching that needle move over. I literally see this every day in my work is, what did you change? When did you change it? When did you review it? And show us the proof in the pudding along the way. This is why LCI is, that piece of that report builder is going to be so key for us in this space.
Greg?
Yeah, my question is going to go to Tim eventually, so I'll still do it. We're having trouble with that problem that Tim just gracefully made it sound easy. We do the assessment, we build a whole map of where are you aligned and not aligned that we can present to the customer, and then we decide which things are the first steps in this journey to getting clean.
Mm-hmm.
How do you decide which things to do first?
Business impact analysis.
Yeah, impact is the word I was going to use, right? Which one is the one that's going to cause the most problem, most likely, and most damage? If
Do you track that outside of LCI?
Today, you almost have to. I think you're going to use LCI to build out the frame, to build out the recommendations and the framework and put schedules and dates on things. We're not really set up to do the business impact analysis. We actually have a ticket in our feature request board to address something like that. But it's not on the immediate roadmap.
I can help.
tell you that.
I can help LCI with that.
Unless
get
you
there,
clone
Alex.
developers, you can't help me with it now.
We can get there at some point.
Yeah. But yes, that impact goes along with that. When you make the recommendation, you're prioritizing low, medium, high, but the impact is what should help you identify whether you're dealing with a low, a medium, or a high. So
We were thinking about tagging to help. So if we can create a tag that
we
says,
probably can use tags to identify impact in the beginning.
just something simple like this is high disruption and this is low disruption. This is
Yep.
high cost, this is low cost, and this is high impact on your security. This is low impact on your security. Just
Yep.
those three alone was what
Yep.
we were speculating.
I like that.
But there's
Yeah.
also nuance from customer to customer. That's the other problem.
Well, and that's why you kind of have to do a business impact analysis, right? You have to actually go back and look at it and say, based on the kind of data you hold and the way that your business operates and how this process affects you ringing the cash register, or whatever, or would put you out of business if it got out, right? I had a customer who said, when I said to them, if all of your data got stolen and put on a billboard on the side of the highway, that was always my question, like, what would that do to your business? And they went, well, somebody'd know where I mail all my packages, but that's about it. And I went, okay, well, then your data is not that important. Your impact is a whole lot smaller. So, my mental health client had a way different answer to that. So, so that impact analysis is important. All right. When onboarding, we onboarding assessment after 2 to 4 weeks, then another one at a month, then 2 months, then quarterly with smaller internal monthly assessments. Kirk, at what point are you doing your big one though? Because you've got hundreds of answers in one of them, right? Or are you breaking them all out into smaller ones?
I mean, we're actually having a meeting next week to go over what we have and make some tweaks and changes. But when we do an onboarding, that's usually going to be a big one, probably not kind of the SOX Nist size, but let's make sure we're aware of what the huge risks are. And with the recommendations, if someone's at like 30%, I'm not going to go into the first meeting and go, here's 35 recommendations. We'll kind of pick the high priority, like if they don't have backups, kind of the higher priority items. And then I'll say, I'm not going to hit you with all the less critical things. I mean, we will talk about them later, and then kind of focus in on maybe 4 or 5 that we feel like are high priority. And then, at the 1 month, we'll bring it up again, kind of see how the projects are going. And then the 2 month, and then the quarterly. And the quarterlies are the bigger ones. Those are kind of, the ones that you're talking about here, with the monthlies being more, we're not going to check the server room every month to see if it still has a lock on it. We're not going to see if it still has air conditioning. We're kind of doing the more or less. Our users turned off that need to be turned off, how, their users still are the right users set up in the VPN groups, or did that get out of alignment, and trying to make sure that we're not missing things, DHCP scopes, things like that on a monthly basis. And then the quarterlies tend to be these larger ones with things like the DMARC, the MF DMARC, some of these other ones.
Are you guys looking for automated ways to sanity check this stuff to put a technical control in place as opposed to a human sanity check, or are you human sanity checking every technical control as well?
Yes, and both. I mean,
Okay.
our quarterlies tend to be more human based. Our monthlies, we kind of rely on our tools to let us, take a look at things. But I also have been bitten with why didn't the Dell server alert us that the RAID battery was dying? And so we'll go and physically check that to see, is there a light on the server that is blinking that we're not getting alerted to? So those will be more of the quarterly check.
Right.
While the monthlies kind of rely on what we have in our tools. So I trust automation up to a certain, but I've been in IT enough.
Yeah.
Right. I've been burned enough to have those quarterly checks in.
Okay.
So ironic, because we were just talking about this topic this week. And I love that you've labeled this evolution, because one of the evolution conversations we had was, right now we create and we try to refine the questions we're trying to ask in an assessment. And we've got like the most senior, most advanced person doing the assessment so that they can evaluate, is this a good question type of thing. But then as we refine and zero in on what the right question to ask is, we envision that we're going to be pushing that down to a less senior person, to an intern, and then eventually automation.
Yep.
And I'm going to get on the soapbox of separating the questions from the assessment, because what I struggle with now is we put this question into an assessment, but the evolution isn't that entire assessment is going to move from a senior person to a junior person. It's going to be, I'm going to take this question out of that assessment and put it somewhere else.
Well, I don't think a question, I think you're at a maturity level and everybody's in a different place, but you're probably at the maturity level right now where your focus should be what questions can't we turn over to a junior person yet? Let's go document those better, update my explanation, remediation, some of the extra fields in the system, and start turning the whole thing over to it. But then as you bring in a new question, it's the smart guy figures out the question, and we don't release it to the assessment until such time as we have it so dialed in we can turn it over to a junior. I mean, I feel like you're far enough in the process that I could hold you to that standard and you'd survive, right? If I did that with somebody who'd been in the platform for 15 minutes, they would immediately cancel their credit card and walk out the door. So, I think there's different levels. So I don't think anybody should feel like, hey, I've got to be to that point. But I think ultimately that's the goal, right? The smart guy does the smart guy work, and automation and delegation do the rest. Use your most expensive resource sparingly and wisely.
Yeah.
So I just threw a Google form out in the chat. It's a pretty simple Google form, but I would like to just have you guys go through. This can be multi-select, so there is no right or wrong answer. I just want to kind of get an idea from our partners, just basically, how you guys view this. You could check 2 boxes for one, and I'm looking at Microsoft 365 security config specifically, thinking that at the door you might have one level, you might have a second level or a third level that goes all the way through, but it may be that soccer sim or something like that, you only use it with your most advanced customers. But if you guys would go through and throw out just what your gut says, don't overthink it. Throw a checkbox in the columns. Really interested to see if you guys have thought about some of these and where they fall. And this is a very small subset of what we did. But I'd kind of encourage you guys to take this offline and kind of go do the same exercise with your internal stuff.
Will you repeat? So basic means we feel like that part of it is part of our basic offering.
I feel like if I were doing it, and these implementation groups are something that are coming from on high from people who understand compliance and security way better than me. My mind immediately goes to basic is basic cyber hygiene, the stuff that I wouldn't take you on as a customer unless you're willing to solve it. Right? Emerging is now you've done the basics. Now I want you to apply the best practices that continue to improve your security stature, that stuff that Kirk's doing at 90 days, 180 days, whatever. And then I'm looking at, if I'm breaking it out, advanced might even be only my HIPAA and my high trust and my other clients get some of the more advanced stuff. Some of you may say, no, everybody gets SOC and SIM, and it's just a thing that's in my solution because cybersecurity is a scary thing, and I'm preparing for it. So I don't want you to take my opinion too much to heart, but that's how I kind of digest them when I look at the CIS framework. And when I look and CMMC is a great example. You can self-attest level 1. You have to bring in someone to attest to level 2. And most people never have to do level 3 unless and Tim can tell you exactly what it is, but unless you have certain levels of control and classified information on your network or whatever, there's certain requirements under which you have to do level 3, but it's not for everybody. So that's the mentality that I'm approaching with. We threw some examples out in the worksheet, and we just kind of threw these out in the environment when we were talking about this in the pre-day, and we just said, budgeting VCIO services and a lifecycle management policy, where do you feel like those belong? And I just on the slide here threw down some of my thoughts on those. I put budgeting in the emerging category because it could be an account management function, and it doesn't require a real VCIO. An account manager can help you build a basic budget. VCIO services, super advanced, requires the most expensive person in your room. That might be your advanced product. It may be in your emerging, but I'm sliding it further to the right. And then lifecycle management policy is super basic. Anybody who can figure out red, yellow, green can do a lifecycle management policy. Your customers almost could do that themselves. So, as 3 things that I was trying to figure out a way to sanely plot, and your mileage may vary, your answers might be different, but that was the logic that I was thinking through it with when I jotted my notes and these are literally just the notes that were in my talking points for my slide deck for that event. And the last slide I have for you guys today is literally just talking through how I documented this in the platform. So when I went in Lifecycle Insights to build the CIS assessment, the CIS 18, which is really 100 and some questions because they're moving the needle on us here. But the CIS 18 breaks things down into implementation groups. So if you notice right here, we have this question falls into all 3 implementation groups, which really just means it's an IG1 question and you answer it in implementation group 1 as well as groups 2 and 3. Like if you're in implementation group 3, they all roll up. You do, if it's in 1, you do it in 2 and 3 as well. Down here, you have one that is only answered if you're doing implementation group 3. So if I've got a customer, they haven't done anything, I'm only going to answer the IG1 questions the first time through to not overload them with the reds. And I'm going to go present them with my cybersecurity basics and have them kind of do the basics first, letting them know that, hey, this is an iterative process, so that I didn't scare you away with all the last level details. We'll work further into this process at the 90-day mark, at the 180-day mark, as we work our way through this. Does that make sense to everybody? And hopefully we'll be able to replace those with tags in the near future. I know devs were working on that literally as we speak.
So, Alex, it's interesting. We've got responses in the form, and you can, if you pull up the responses, you'll see it in bar charts so that you can get kind of the view from the stickers as folks are filling that out.
Can you send me the link to that? I only have the fillable link handy. I think you sent it to me earlier today.
Yeah, I will.
Alex, quick question on CIS that you're showing here in IG 1, 2, and 3. In your assessment templates, do you have quote unquote 4 versions of this? Meaning,
I don't. I only have one.
do you want 4 versions? One that's just IG1, one that's IG2, one that's IG3, and one that's everything?
I don't think so. Because the tool does a pretty good job of hiding the questions you didn't answer.
Okay.
If you're taking a customer through the process, and this is kind of how I thought through it, if you're running the customer through the process, you're going to run IG1 the first time. The second time, you're going to run IG1 and IG2. You're not going to stop asking the IG1 questions. But when you do a comparison, you're going to be able to show, look at all the red you had in IG1. Now look at how much better IG1 is, and now into IG2. So you'll be able to show the comparison the whole time and show, here's all the things we fixed, and then here's the questions that we added.
Makes sense.
So
I was just offering to give them to you if you needed.
No, it's an interesting way to look at it. And like I said, this is one of those things where I don't know that I have the best practice. Everyone's mileage may vary, but my thought process was, when I go to that assessment comparison report where I can see it was red, now it's green, it was yellow, now it's green, it was gray, and now it's still gray, right? Or we didn't have this question and now it's red. You'd really be able to see the evolution if we did it on the same template all the way through. So that was my thinking on the process, right, wrong, or otherwise. That was my thinking on it. Oh, this goes. So a little bit of consensus on some of these. I like that everyone loves password policies. Some folks doing log correlation early, some folks holding it till later. That's okay. I like it. And, we could sit and debate every one of these topics the whole way through. All I would encourage you guys to do is maybe debate it internally, but make sure that you understand why it was that you scored them that way. I don't know that there's right and wrong answers, as long as you have a good solid why behind what you did. The other problem with this, the slight drawback to this, is it's very easy to misinterpret or interpret differently some of these statements. So they're not the most clear and transparent. We know that going in. So I think this was a good exercise for the folks in the room. We had a lot of folks come up to us even 3 days later and go, "Oh my God, that was awesome. That really got me thinking about the way that I'm doing things." I hope, at least for somebody on the call, we've got you thinking in a different direction, or at least starting to, open your eyes to different ways to do things. I don't think everyone has to change the way that they run assessments tomorrow. But I think this is something that the industry is adopting. We're seeing the pattern from CIS to CMMC and different deployments of this. I think it's healthy. I keep referring back to the way that CIS does implementation groups because I like the way that they did them. I am a huge fan of being able to keep your categories the way they are and not have to use categories as implementation groups, right? When we did our
The CMMC went right out of the gate.
CMMC does it right out of the gate, and then we did a sample category based assessment inside the tool. There's a template in there for that too. And I just don't like the way they lay out. They're just not comfortable. They're not friendly to talk through. You've got network questions scattered all over the place, and then you've got hardware questions scattered all over the place. And it's just easier to deal with hardware and then networking and then cybersecurity, and allow the implementation groups to continue to flow through. So we'll plug this hole shortly with tags and give you guys some ability to report on these and filter on these and do some of that. It's going to be a slow and steady evolution, just like everything else we're building. But this is all stuff that we expect tags to be done this quarter, right, Marnie? It's a Q3 deliverable.
I mean, they're working on it now. Yeah. So
Let's not talk about CompTIA assessments. Let's just not go there, Tim. Nobody needs another framework or portal or peer group I could go on. I could go on and on and on.
Well, I'm glad you didn't say webinar, because I do want to put our webinar links in the chat. So
No, we do need another webinar. There's
Yeah.
going to be another webinar. I get to talk to Huntress. That'll be a fun one because
yeah, so I'm going to put two.
They'll
for
tell me everything I do wrong.
We've got one with Huntress. I'm putting that in the chat first. That's next Tuesday with Alex and Ethan from Huntress, and then I'm doing one with Jeremy from Blumira.
Oh, love those guys too. If you're trying to figure out how to solve that seam problem,
Yeah,
Dean, I do not have news on Hoodoo at this point, but I will get you an answer.
yeah. The only news that we have on Hoodoo is that the flexible asset type piece that we built in IT Glue was the first step for Hoodoo. So I think. And I'm not sure if we're waiting on Hoodoo or not beyond that, but I do know that we've done the first piece of that.
I don't know that I think Hoodoo's API is ready. I don't know that we're waiting on them for anything. I would guess, Dean, that we are simply dealing with competing priorities. The devs are building a lot of things.
So Jeff, I like that you have the sales team using an assessment for pre-sales evaluation.
Yeah, it brings them in also when we'll bring them in to some of our QBRs and VCIO discussions as well. And it gets them thinking, okay, this is how we manage on the back end. If you start the process at the front end, get that evaluation, it also identifies quickly, hey, here's some holes. And I think, and Alex has said it a couple of times, hey, if you want to do business with us, we got to fix this now.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
These are
there's
the
no point in
non-negotiables.
talking.
Yeah.
If you're not willing to use MFA, modern authentication, or just complex password policies, why are we going to beat ourselves to death or heads against the keyboard? And there's no point in continuing.
Yeah.
It gives him some really good prospecting information and starts the whole thing off right. And then we on the account side, we've got a great baseline to work from, because now we can show them the growth from completely horrible to, all right, you're on the right track. And then here's where you're going to be by this time next year.
Yep.
Really nice.
Are you setting the hook early as well with, and what it looks like to work with us is, we'll have an assessment like this and a meeting like this quarterly or semi-annually or at some cadence?
Yes. Yeah. Depending on the size of the group, scope, et cetera, say, hey, you'd be, if you're, pulling this quarterly, annually, semi-annually, at the very least annually, we're going to look at this every year in this same format, and you will see the growth. Or you'll be managing your roadmap on a quarterly basis.
Yep. There's some great sales methodology. I mean, they even train this in the auto sales space to tell someone, Jeff, you are going to look so great. You're going to feel good driving this car. Just imagine the convertible hood down, a 75-degree day, the sun's out, and you're driving this instead of that thing you drove into the lot on, right? And but that's the sales process, right? Mr. Customer, imagine there is a better way. And not only will I sit here and explain to you and show you our methodology, not just come in here and surprise you with things, but show you and explain to you our methodology. We'll partner with you to do this over time to continue to
You pulled my old resume. How'd you know I was in car sales back in the 80s?
No, I was in car sales in the 90s. So
hey,
yeah, I was a Toyota and a Ford salesman. Defeat the processes with an annual review. So Ron, I want you to come on and talk about that one, because I think it depends on who you are and who your customer is, whether you're doing an annual review or a quarterly review. Are you doing a different review annually than you do quarterly, or are you doing the same assessment and only doing annuals, or are you only doing something different?
Well, I just have a client that wants to do annuals, and I just feel
Oh.
that there is so much that can change over the course of 12 months that it's just doesn't make good sense to do an annual.
Yeah. How big is the customer?
I mean, the customer's small. They've got like 5 endpoints or something like that. But
I wouldn't
still,
touch them any more than annual either.
oh, really?
Well, I think so. Let's do the math problem, right? What do you charge a customer with 5 endpoints? And I'm not asking you to answer that question. I'll answer it for you. Let's say I'm charging them $127 an endpoint, whatever. Some realm of better than $100 an endpoint, right? Knowing that Chris stood up yesterday and said the average MSP charges $68 an endpoint for fully managed. Over the hundreds of MSPs that he talks to, that's the average number. If it made anybody else throw up in your mouth, me too. But so let's say we're charging double. Let's say we're charging $130 an endpoint for 5 endpoints. That's $680. If I put all my tools on there, that wipes away the first $80. Now I got $600. I can put less than 5 hours of work into that contract every month. They call in for a password reset. We got to fix a printer, something else goes on. You know, we very quickly whittle away the money for that. Running a full assessment, doing a QBR, pulling all the work together, even if I'm really freaking good at it, even for a small customer, 2-3 hours, then an hour to go
Right.
present it. Right.
Right.
All of a sudden, the math problem on this customer is upside down. So I don't know that you can afford to meet with them more than twice a year. And once a year starts to look really, really good. So I
Yeah.
think, you know, the answer might be that you meet with them annually and send them a much shorter, much more streamlined semi-annual digital report of here's where you're at on your asset list. Don't forget about that thing that's about to go end of life. Here's where you're at on the budget. Don't forget about this quarter that's coming up that's a biggie. But we're not going to do the full risk assessment and the full Monty that is so painful, but every so often with a small client. In my mind, it's just a math problem. You know, at some point they've got to pay $3-4 grand a month before I want to talk to them more than 2 or 3 times a year.
Yeah, I charge them $620 a month for 4 endpoints and a server.
Right. So, I mean, just go back and look at how many tickets they open, how many hours you put into them, because at the end of the day, this is business. This is a math problem. And it's
Right.
not that I don't like small customers. In fact, I have a significant amount of empathy for them. And I've had this conversation with everyone who will listen to try and ask the question, like, how do we as MSPs continue to provide value to the very small business, right? Because small businesses make up a ton of the American economy. Small businesses with less than 25 humans make up something like, you know, 90% of the US economy. I would love to find the right solution for these people, but you guys are fighting a math problem. You can't go broke because we have empathy for them and want to meet with them every single quarter. And that's
Right.
just the tough reality. I hate to say it.
So you're gonna have next Friday, our event, and you're gonna explain how to do that for us.
How to do what? The smaller part?
Yeah, the
Or-
smaller ones.
You know, I think
we
Marnie
did-
talks about this sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah, we talked about this a little bit at 7 Figures. So one of the things that I did was, so I worked with school districts and they were very regionalized, and a lot of the same school districts of the same size worked the same way. Similar to where you may think about verticals. I know that Kirk has had group webinars of like folks. It was more of a sales type of thing. But if you can think in bulk, it's almost as good as automation. So are there opportunities for you to say, we're doing our quarterly business review of cybersecurity, not for an individual company, right? But for a group. Send them their report in advance and say, we're going to talk about some of the high level things that are changing in the world of business. And let's think about your priorities. Pick some business outcomes, right? We talk about aligning technology objectives to business outcomes and do some bulk meetings, be they regional, be it a lunch and learn type of thing, or even just a webinar of,
Call it
okay,
a workshop.
Yeah.
Call it a workshop, sell it for $99, give away your blank template for free and let people write their answers in, give it away to your customers as a value add, bring them in and show them where they're at quarterly. Now you've got a marketing tool.
Asking you guys deliver. That's brilliant, actually. I was just talking to somebody this week who is doing a lot of social stuff. He's getting a lot of reach outs of customers who aren't really good candidates. And he did similar to what you're talking about, but different of open office hours Wednesdays, and then he streams it out there, which ends up becoming this content for his social.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's more.
That's awesome.
But I love what you're talking about. So
So
thank you.
my answer at my MSP for the very small business was, if you were less than $1,500 a month and, 8-10 users, you weren't allowed to have any data on your local network. We literally moved everything into cloud hosted RDS, and your workstation became a dumb terminal, and we locked everything down, tightened everything up. Most of your vendors are pretty lenient with licensing on RDS boxes. So you host an RDS box, you get one threat locker license, one, of all of your security licenses. You stick SOC and SIM on it, and you can actually deploy a lot of layers across 10 users. Still not a cheap product. You're still a few $100s a user, but your environments are ridiculously standardized. Once you figure out printers and scanners and some of the weird little caveats, life is really easy. And so that was our solution for it. We turned away 5 customers for every one that we took on because they didn't want to spend the money, but we had a solution for them. And it was a very much a square peg, square hole. Thou must land here in order to work with us. But we had a guy across town who learned that we did it. And he was a, really small he was more of a break fix shop. 2 of his customers got encrypted over the years, and they got crypto locked, lost databases, crazy stuff. And he brought them to us and said, these are the people you need to work with. Your needs are just beyond me. And one of them had to restore a backup from 3 months ago and go re-enter all their data and all this. But once they went into our cloud environment, they were all perfectly happy because they felt more safe and secure than they did running stuff on their home version of Windows Notebook with a free antivirus or something. So we didn't make a killing at it, but it helped me sleep at night knowing that I wasn't turning away those very small businesses. If anybody wants to have a talk through of what that feels like or what that might look like, happy to kind of spitball that with you guys next week and kind of, do we have a topic for next week, Marnie? Are we kicking something else out?
We're gonna talk about small businesses and how to have that
There we
conversation.
go.
Ready?
I'm very happy to turn that into a conversation point, and I think it's an important one. I'm kind of a sucker for helping the little guy anyways. So, perfectly happy to spitball that with you guys and figure out how you can come up with an offering that not only enables you to work with small businesses, but enables you to deliver real security services for them, because that's the hard part.
I think it is multi-layers too, not just the services you're offering, but how you're going to support them customer success wise, help desk wise, all of the pieces of the customer journey, services and products.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that can be evolved on as well. I think there's some good talking points there.
Yeah.
Who here just turns away small business? Like, who here has a minimum that you just say, if you're less than 10 clients out the door, less than 25, whatever?
I don't like to take anybody less than 4 endpoints.
Yeah, that's a real reasonable number.
Yeah, 4 or less. No.
A lot of the coaches say 10.
Well, it's interesting. They also talk about scaling up, right? You talked about that this week of, Ron, your limit might be 4 today, but in a year it may be 10, right? If you're getting so much business.
Right.
And see, that's something we like to do. We like to take and grow with the company.
Yeah.
So that's why we'll take and start at 4.
Yep.
I actually have one that's 2 with 2 virtual desktops and Office 365, but they're a brand new company and I can see them growing already. So I'm sitting there going, okay, let's go ahead and grow together.
Yeah. Well, and my point, what Marnie was saying, what I said at 7 Figure this week was, the clients that you have today might not be the clients that your favorite clients. Your hey, this is my ideal client profile today. You might look at that client a year from now, or 2 years from now, or 5 years from now and go, why the hell am I still working with them? Like, we've evolved, we've grown up, and they haven't. They're still just a 5-person business that wants to run on a work group with their Google Docs, right? And so there is an evolution, and Paul Dipple, talks about operational maturity. As you become more operationally mature, you will find yourself naturally attracted to clients who are equally operationally mature. So either you bring those immature clients with you, teach them along the way, deliver some operational maturity training. We have one MSP who works with us who actually has an EOS trainer on staff who does their own internal EOS and then does EOS for some of their customers to continue to bring them along with them, which I think is a neat caveat. But some of this is like, bring folks along with you and they'll come for the ride, or they'll self-select and say, you know what, Matt, I think you've kind of outgrown us. You're too big and fancy for me now. I need to go find somebody else. And I had customers say that to me along the way. We tried really hard to keep them because we didn't like to see anybody feel forced out, but sometimes they were right. You know,
I got
become
one
too
getting rid of us
operational.
because we're not more mature, I guess.
It happens, right? There is a natural alignment of like humans, right? We just attract ourselves to people who are similar to us. And I think the maturity model in the business is the same way. So I don't think that's a shot at anybody. Sometimes you're just not appropriately aligned to be the right person to be in business with somebody else. That's
Well,
okay.
So when I was teaching, they would say some kids will learn better because you're the teacher and some kids will learn worse because you're the teacher, right? So it's the same thing for supporting businesses, right?
Yeah.
You are
Yeah.
better for some people because you align culture, product, services, vision, etc. And for some reasons you're not.
Yep. There were people who were just way too gentle and fragile to deal with me, and they didn't want to be my customer, and that was okay. And there were customers who really appreciated that I wouldn't sugarcoat it, that I would just tell them
Snowflakes
what needed
need
to be
not
said.
apply.
Right. Yeah, but and we figured that out really early, right? I would tell folks that early on, like, you're either going to love me for it or you're going to hate me for it, but I'm going to tell you, your network's a dumpster fire.
You know,
Those words hurt your feelings. I should probably leave.
Well, and just like we've been talking all along, you start with that, hey, here are some of the things that, you know, we've got to have to do business together. And if that becomes a stopping point, I'd rather find that out way ahead in the sales process.
Yep.
Say, fine, move along to the next one, then
I'd
down the road,
certainly rather find it out before I've put
a contract in. Yeah.
75 hours of onboarding into a customer who's going to come back to me in 45 days and go, you know I signed a 3-year contract, but this really isn't working out for me. What can I do to get the hell out of here? Because I don't like you anymore. Right. I want to know early because I'm probably going to let that customer go. I'm just going to piss them out about it for years.
So
Right.
Exactly.
Would you at that point just nullify that contract and walk away?
I would. Alex Rogers said to me one day, nobody's ever going to sue anybody over $3,500 a month for a managed services contract. If you are, you're going to pay more to your lawyer than you're going to get for the contract.
Yeah.
So your contract is only there as a speed bump to get your customer to say, I have an obligation to go back and work this out with Jeff because I signed a contract. But at the end of the day, if he tears up the contract and walks away, what are you going to do?
Right. Yeah.
Right. So, yeah.
Better to part
In the world of
friends
customer
than enemies.
success,
Yeah.
just it doesn't lead any. You're not going to win any new work off of that.
No. In fact, I'm going to go back to that customer and I'm going to sit down with them and say, you know, I appreciate that, but you know, thanks for letting me know why we didn't work out, whatever. Could you give me some more detail? Could you help me learn what we could have done better or different? Like, I'm going to go take it as a learning experience. Even if I know they're completely in the wrong and they're insane, I'm going to go back and do that because I want them to feel like when they left, I left them in good spirits, and maybe they'll go to somebody else who's in a different situation and say, well, Alex didn't work out for me. He might be your kind of people.
Well, that's the thing. What if, and I'll throw this out, what if you have someone who's maybe not a competitor, but is more suited to handle that smaller customer that you develop a relationship with and say, hey, listen, you know, we may not be the fit, but here's Dave and here's Alex. These guys, they're going to take good care of you.
Yep.
It was
You know,
kind
they're
of
gonna
the
give you-
way, just dumping them in your competitor's lap, which is what I thought.
Yeah, well, it's a soft intro, but by the same token, you know, a lot of goodwill goes a long way.
Well, and
especially
there's some
in
of
the
that,
community.
like they're going to give you the intimate level of service you need, or the, you know,
Yeah.
whatever, however you want to phrase it. Like they'll work around your craziness better than I will. You know, their standards are more
I think
flexible
you
than
could
mine.
just say birds of a feather flock together, and I feel like this is a better fit for you. And you
These
didn't
are
have
your
to
people.
say that it was a dodo bird, for example.
And I'll tell
Oh,
you,
no.
at my old MSP, there was only one guy in town that I wasn't on a first name friendly basis with. You know,
Yeah.
I'd walk in, I'd go to lunch with most of them. We knew who was a good fit for who, and we passed some business back and forth. And there was one guy who was a complete jackass that was ignorant to everybody, who we would just wanted to see go out of business. But everybody else we were on good terms with.
Yeah.
There's one guy who he had one medical client and I had another, and for one reason or another, they were passing x-rays back and forth over VPN, some ridiculousness. And he took 4 weeks to fix a VPN issue on his side, and a customer fired me for it. So he and I didn't get along very well, but the rest of them we're on pretty good terms with. That's why I don't like doctors. Anybody here specialize in doctors? That's for a special kind of sadist.
We just had this conversation at lunch.
All right. Well, with that, it is 4 o'clock on a Friday. It is 5 o'clock somewhere. And you guys should all not work an extra service ticket today because we took our whole hour, and go enjoy the rest of your weekend. We'll have an interesting
Thanks, guys.
conversation next week, no doubt.
Yeah, we will.
Oh,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Looking forward to
All right,
it.
everybody. Take care.
Bye.